One day in 1972, Lily Gray was driving her Ford Pinto on a California freeway when it stalled. She was then rear-ended at a speed of 30 miles per hour. The Pinto's fuel tank ruptured, a spark ignited the leaking fuel, and the Pinto exploded, ending the lives of Lily and severely injuring her passenger. This whole incident could have been avoided as the company was very much aware of the serious risks associated with the car, but the company prioritized profits over safety. Story of our lives, I guess, and proceeded to release the car. Anyway, once again, story of our lives, because as some engineers stated back then, safety was a taboo with the leadership at the time, so it was not a topic discussed or prioritized. I say this all to say, there are serious consequences when safety is not prioritized, and Formula One knows this better than most. If you don't live under a rock, you've probably heard the many concerns from many drivers on the grid about the 2025 Formula One regulations and the safety issues surrounding them. And the recent Ollie Bearman crash at the 2026 Japanese Grand Prix has seemed to bring it all to a head. So I guess we're all now just waiting with bated breath to see what the FIA does following this incident and the subsequent conversations that are being had around the safety of this year's setup. And so I decided in this video we're going to discuss different instances where the FIA did not take drivers' concerns about safety seriously and from the past and make our way back to where we are now in 2026. I'll preface this with, if anything changes between when I filmed this video and when I'm about to release it, I will include that at the end of the video. Let's go back to 1950. Back in the earlier days of Formula One, safety and motorsport in general, let's be honest, safety precautions were almost non-existent. It was not a priority to them. Helmets and seatbelts were not mandatory, and drivers did not even have safety suits. They were allowed to wear short sleeves while they drove, even though the cars were going ridiculous speeds of up to 180 miles per hour. This general blasé attitude, though, seemed to shift after the 1955 Le Mans Endurance 24-hour race, where driver Pierre Levay's Mercedes was involved in a collision, resulting in it catching a light and spiraling into the crowd nearby, leading to Levay's death and the deaths of 82 spectators with over 100 injured. Circuit safety was then prioritized, with Switzerland completely banning motorsport racing up until 2022, with Italy and France also implementing short-term bans. Seatbelts were not implemented well into the mid-60s, as drivers felt it was safer for them to be thrown out of the car as opposed to being trapped inside, because obviously the cars used to catch a light and no one wants to burn to death if it can be helped. Like, you're safer being thrown out than you are staying in the car. That's the stage they were at. Helmets evolved from open to full face following governing body standards. Some other safety features that were introduced as a result of the Le Mans tragedy were the introduction of safety barriers and later wider runoff areas. Spectator safety was also prioritized, with changes to rules that dictated where watchers could and could not stand, as well as the introduction of debris fences. At the 1996 Belgian Grand Prix, so Jackie Stewart was involved in a near-fatal incident where he was trapped upside down in his car with the fuel leaking onto his body into his suit, leading him to become one of the strongest proponents for safety reform in the sport. The later death of his friend Jim Clark in 1968 further intensified the need for advocacy amongst drivers for safety. Smith himself has stated that Clark's loss actually signaled a shift in mentality among drivers. They stopped feeling like they were invincible, they couldn't die, and I think the reality of like how precarious their situation was started to sink in. Stewart, Denny Hulme, Jack Brabham, and Joaquin Rindt were actively pushing for circuit changes to eliminate dangerous obstacles like trees and lampposts. Their advocacy actually held a lot of sway with the governing body at the time in order to make these changes happen. Although these pushes for change were not met by no pushback, as some drivers were not as concerned about safety and just felt like it was an unnecessary overstep by the governing body to try and dictate so heavily what safety precautions teams and drivers should have to take. In 1970, Rindt actually threatened, amongst other drivers, to boycott the 1970 German Grand Prix when he found out that Nürburgring, where it was supposed to be held, hadn't met the GPDA's safety requests. The GPDA, by the way, was the governing body of Formula One at the time, leading to the race actually being moved to Hockenheim in order for it to take place. Unfortunately, just 2 races later at the Italian Grand Prix, which was held in Monza that year, Rindt lost control during his practice, causing him to crash into a barrier where he ultimately lost his life. The crash actually caused a barrier to part upon impact, and Rindt, who was not wearing a crotch belt strap, slid under the upper seat belt, leading to his death. I don't want to get into what happened. Upon investigation, it was discovered that the poorly installed crash barriers caused the death. There were other casualties along the way between that 1970 race and up until the point of 1978, where some real change occurred. But in 1978, Rodney Peterson died at the same race track in Monza for the 1978 Grand Prix, which led to lasting changes. Bernie Ecclestone, who was like basically the acting CEO of Formula One at the time, had enlisted Dr. Sid Watkins to try and improve the medical standards of the circuits, but the doctor was barred from entering or investigating Peterson's crash site rather, and because the circuit's attitude at the time was that he had no jurisdiction to be there. This incident actually led to Ecclestone and the governing body of the time granting doctors more authority in Formula One. Increased televised nature of these events in this era also accelerated safety measures. Some of these tragedies were televised and were actually unsettling to full-on traumatizing for viewers, and because of concerns of potentially losing out on the opportunity for this to be televised, losing money ultimately for the sport, lit the fire under the asses, in it, without lack of a better phrase, of the governing body at the time to implement more stringent safety measures for the sport. In the 1980s, the focus of safety measures in F1 shifted more to car design. As technology developed, with the introduction of carbon fiber chassis, cars became much better at resisting impact and protecting drivers. Fuel tanks were also now housed within the car's monocoque, and this was all due to John Barnard's 1981 McLaren MP4, or McLaren 1 if you want to call it that. They introduced the concept of a carbon fiber car, which created a protective safety shell, if you will, around the driver. Although this is now standard practice, back then it actually revolutionized crash protection by preventing the cockpit from collapsing during impacts. Unfortunately for everyone, these changes were not enough. If you are an F1 fan, a long-standing F1 fan, you know what I'm about to get into. Unfortunately, though, these changes were not good enough, as we're going to see. The 1990s were the most integral years for F1 safety enhancements, and it's all primarily due to the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix. Ayrton Senna, arguably one of the best drivers in Formula One history,
and the main motivation to all of us is to compete for a victory.
If you don't agree, argue with the wall. I do not care, okay? Lost his life when he crashed into a concrete barrier at the Tamburello corner, just a day after Ratzenberger had hit a concrete barrier wall at the corner in qualifying, which was also fatal. It was stated at the time that there was quite a panicked reaction at first, because they actually just ended up imposing a bunch of restrictions for subsequent races, but it also served as a reminder that Formula One still had work to do with regards to safety, and they could not become complacent, which I think they still need to be concerned about safety. I think that is something that going forward, that will always be a concern. Stricter barrier tests and side impact tests were introduced, while the science behind barrier protection was more thoroughly assessed. The comprehensive safety overhaul of the 1990s extended beyond track and car design to the drivers themselves. Now let's get into the 2000s incidents that I feel like more people watching this video would actually remember, because I think most of us were not born during the earlier days of Formula One and Formula One safety. In 2009, Felipe Massa's helmet was actually hit by a spring from Barrichello's car, which led to Massa being knocked out, crashing into a tire barrier and sustaining a fractured skull, resulting in further helmet safety changes being enacted. But the most significant change F1 experienced within the last 15 years was the introduction of the Halo cockpit protection system in 2018.
The Halo is a mandatory head protection device introduced into the sport in 2018. Constructed from aerospace industry grade 5 titanium, it can withstand the weight of a London double-decker bus. It is the strongest part of the car, yet it weighs only 7 kilos. The Halo is the latest step in the relentless development of driver safety.
This was introduced due to the death of Jules Bianchi in 2015 due to a crash in the 2014 Japanese Grand Prix after a long assessment process done by the FIA. This change was met by some skepticism from drivers, like the 2003 implementation of the Hans device, but the Halo has very obviously saved lives. I can think on the top of my head of a handful of instances that it saved people. 2021, Lewis Hamilton, Grosjean also was saved by that. Charles Leclerc was saved by it as well. And in every one of those instances, you have a driver, more than one potentially, but you have at least one driver talking about how when they first introduced that apparatus or that device onto the cars, they were not jazzed about it, they were not excited about it, but they realized the utility when their life was on the line, in theory. Weather safety has long been a concern of Formula One as well, but I do think more priority should be placed onto whether other weather conditions will have a negative impact on driver performance and driver safety. And this was exemplified by the 2023 Qatar Grand Prix. As the race was so hot, some drivers even fainted, obviously raising concerns about whether races under these conditions should still take place, as if visibility was too low. When it's raining, you stop the race. Maybe if it is too hot for them to continue to the point where they cannot do more than 18 laps on their tires in a round, maybe we should think about whether this race should continue. But I guess that's a conversation for another time. And so that brings us to where we are now. Ollie Bearman obviously had a 50G crash, which was extremely scary to witness, and he looked injured upon getting out of the car at the 2026 Japanese Grand Prix due to the significant speed differentials as a result of the new race regulations due to the 50-50 hybrid system. This actually led to drivers like Carlos Sainz criticizing the FIA for ignoring driver warnings that predicted the exact type of crash that Ollie was involved in. He also alleged that they kept the rule because it makes racing more exciting. McLaren is also a team that has previously raised safety concerns about the same situation. And that's not all. The starts have long been a contentious subject. If you've looked online about anything to do with Formula One, you have probably seen article after article after article about how teams have been fighting for the race starts to be changed, and other teams basically saying it's too late for us to consider it. This contentious subject goes back to last year when Ferrari had reportedly warned the FIA about these start procedures, but they were instructed to adjust the procedures and basically ignored when they raised their concerns, with incidents in Australia and China being described as dangerous due to extreme speed differentials. Drivers have also explained frustration with being beholden to the power units, which causes high speed differentials. Again, the speed differential seems to be the crux of the issue. Although I do believe all safety concerns, so this is not a victim blaming type situation, like I do believe them and I do think a lot of people are very worried about the concerns. Max himself has expressed that a way to get the FIA to listen, it seems, allegedly, is to use the word safety when discussing the changes you want made or when discussing the changes overall. So they'll take it more seriously, I guess, which makes sense. Safety is a powerful word, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I do believe like safety is a concern for some people, but I do also think it's strategic, if that makes sense, which is fine. Like, two birds, one stone. I think the priority should also still be safety though. Many drivers have also expressed frustration with the fact that their input is not being considered when it comes to these new rules and regulations. But I guess now the FIA is worried at the very least about the optics of the situation, allegedly, as they have called a meeting to discuss potential changes or concerns. Saying all of this, I do, however, need to acknowledge that I need to eat crow at a certain instance in this situation, because although I have previously stated that I have found this year significantly more entertaining, I would never prioritize my entertainment or anyone's entertainment over the safety of drivers. And I feel like everyone within the fandom or within the sport feels that way. Like, it doesn't matter how fun it is if people are being harmed. And so I hope they do like find a solution that makes it significantly safer for drivers without having to sacrifice the season completely, because obviously the changes that they might need to implement would change the whole landscape of the sport. But I guess we will see how all of that pans out. And so ultimately I'll end my video with this. I just think the sport needs to not be so reactive and instead proactive, as we've seen in the past to now. It does not need to take the worst case scenario happening, fatalities or severe injuries, for changes to be made. Like, I think when concerns are first raised, they should be genuinely investigated, as opposed to just waiting and seeing how it all pans out. If it all works out, then yay. I think a bad situation is still a bad situation, whether it ends badly or not. You know, you do not need to be taking risks with people's lives. This is a dangerous sport, and we don't need to make it unnecessarily more dangerous than it needs to be. Especially important to listen to drivers about their concerns, because they're the ones who are physically putting their lives on the line when getting into these cars. And so we don't need any more avoidable tragedies. But I guess we'll see what happens after this break, within the next week potentially, what they decide with regards to safety and addressing certain safety concerns. But that's all from me. If you enjoyed this video, let me know down below. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.